Hi, welcome back to the channel where we make things just because. Today I'm going to be making 3 projects that are decor items for my little girl's bedroom, all made from yarn. So let me show you how I did it. We're going to start today with the easiest of the 3 projects, which is the yarn wall hanging. You will only really need 2 items for this project, and that is a yarn of your choice and a wooden dowel. I started this one by working out how long I wanted the lengths of yarn to be. To do this, I worked out where the changing colour is on the colour changing yarn and divided that into 4 equal lengths, giving me lengths of 124 centimetres. This would give me a length of 62 centimetres on the hanging when it was finished. I was quite happy with this as my length, so I spent the next hour or so cutting out a whole bunch of these. I then began adding all the lengths of yarn to my dowel. This is really easy to do. You just have to fold the yarn in half, place the looped part up and under the dowel, and then feed the ends of the yarn through the loop and pull it tight. To ensure my pattern was centred on the dowel, I started from the centre and worked my way out to the edges just like this. Once I had all my yarn in place, I then trimmed it into a V shape. You can trim this however you like, it doesn't have to be a V shape, but that's what I liked, so I did it. So with it all finished, let's see some pretty pictures of this one. Next up, we have these feather art pieces. For this one, you actually only need yarn. I chose to frame them, so I also used picture frames, but there are plenty of other ways to hang these. Oh, and this lollipop stick is really helpful too. To make this easier for myself, I worked out how tall and wide I wanted my feathers to be and then cut out a cardboard template to use. I started by using the length of the template to create the spine of the feather. As you can see, this is 2 lengths of the long side of the template. Next, I created the pieces for the fluffy part of the feather. I did this by winding the yarn round and round the short side of the template as many times as I could be bothered to do. You're going to need quite a few of these, so just keep going. Once this was done, I cut them free along one side of the template and then cut them in half to create the right lengths. Now to get started, first I looped my yarn over my lollipop stick and secured the stick to the table with some tape. This makes it easier to tighten down your knots later on. I then tied a basic knot just under the stick to hold everything in place. This next part is a little bit more complicated to explain, but I will do my best. First, take 2 small pieces of yarn and fold the first one in half. Lay this down under the spine with the loop on one side and the tails on the other. Now take the second length and fold that in half as well. Now feed the tails of the second piece through the loop of the first piece, and with the second piece going over the spine, pinch the tails of the first piece through the loop of the second. Then pull them tight and push them to the top of the spine. Now I just had to repeat this process, but starting on the other side. So if the first loop was on the left side on the first knot, it should now be on the right. This is probably way easier to understand from watching than from my description. Now I just had to keep going, alternating back and forth on which side I started. Once I got near the bottom, I just needed to work out where I wanted to stop. I like to stop when my side pieces are the same length as my spine when pulled down, so as I neared the bottom, I started to check where this would be. It can get a little fiddly towards the bottom, but you just have to make sure you aren't pulling on the wrong threads. Once I was happy with the length, I just tied it off. Now, to make it all fluffy, all you have to do is comb it out. For this, I suggest starting at the ends of the yarn and working towards the spine. I also suggest you hold on to the threads close to the spine, as they can sometimes be pulled free while combing them out. Once it started to look all nice and fluffy on one side, I flipped it over and combed it out on the underside. Here you can see just how much of a difference combing it out really makes. Once it is all combed out and nice and fluffy, it will look a little bit crazy, but that's fine because all you need to do is trim it into place. I like to make sure mine are quite round at the top and have a nice point at the bottom. And that's the feather all finished. They don't all have to be plain and boring though. Here you can see some two-toned versions. This one on the left was done by alternating the colour of the yarn every 2 knots to create a striped effect. This one on the right was done by changing colour halfway. I alternated a little bit in the middle to try and blend the 2 colours together. One thing you do have to think about when doing this one is that you want your spine colour to be whatever your bottom half colour is going to be, as this becomes part of the bottom. Now all I had to do was glue them into the frames. I just used hot glue for this. You cannot put glass into the frames as it squashes the feathers and they just don't look very nice. I only put hot glue along the spine because otherwise you end up with patchy feathers. And here we are, time for some more pretty pictures. Last but certainly not least, we are going to make this string art piece. For this one you need a yarn of your choice, some panel pins and a backboard of your choice. The backboard can be a solid wood stained or a piece of rustic wood, but I chose a plain MDF board because I'm going to be painting mine pink. And that's where I started. I made sure I painted all around the edges and then I used a roller to paint the main face. This just gives it the smoothest finish in my opinion. After 2 coats of paint and some drying time, it was time to put my design on. I printed my design out and taped it to the front of the board. You can draw this straight onto the board if you would rather, but you will need to be able to remove it later on. Once my design was in place, it was time to hammer in a lot of panel pins. I recommend you use a pair of pliers or a clothes peg to hold your pins, or you will end up with a lot of ouchy fingers in your future. It doesn't really matter how close the pins are together, so long as they are fairly even all the way around. Mine were about 1 centimetre apart. I just followed the outline of my design all the way around. The only really important thing here is when a line changes direction, you need to make sure that there is a pin in the spot where the lines connect. Otherwise, the design will lose its shape and can become unrecognisable. Once this was done all the way around, I tore away my paper template. This didn't come off as neatly as I wanted it to, so I had to go in with a pair of tweezers and remove all the little bits that had got stuck. Now it really starts to come together. I started by tying my yarn to one corner and then traced the outline of the entire pattern, making sure to loop around each pin as I got to it. Once I made it back to the first pin, I then started crossing over the design in random directions to fill it in. This part doesn't have to be done in any particular order, but I tried to make sure that there was no pattern, and that by the end all the pins around the outside had been looped around at least once. Be careful here, because if you don't keep enough tension on the yarn, this will happen. And then you have to start over. Once I was happy with how my design was filled in, I then led the yarn back to the first pin I started on and tied the ends of the strings together. Then, to make sure it didn't randomly untie itself, I added a touch of super glue to the knot to hold it in place. Now it's time for the mane. For this, I wrapped my yarn lengthwise around a 30cm ruler. Again, you need to do this quite a lot, so just keep on going. Once I had what I thought would be enough, I cut them free at one end of the ruler. I was then left with this bunch of soon-to-be hair. To attach this to the unicorn, I placed the yarn under the outside edge of the design and pulled the tails through the loop, just like in the first project. This was a little bit fiddly, so I created a little needle out of some floral wire to help me get the yarn into the gaps. Then I just kept going along the edge until I was happy with how it looked, and this is what I ended up with. I then added some of my coloured yarn to the horn in a zigzag pattern to make it look more like a unicorn horn. Now I just had to trim the mane to the right length and I was basically done. I did, however, add these hangers to the back of the board which I stole from another picture frame that I wasn't using so that it could be hung on the wall. And now one last time for some pretty pictures. So there we have it, guys. That's all 3 projects for today. I absolutely adored doing these ones. They were so quick and so easy. And more importantly, my daughter was absolutely over the moon with these. So if you enjoyed them too, please don't forget to like and subscribe on this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye.